Now, let's get a closer look.
The internal female reproductive organs consist of the ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, and vagina. The fallopian tubes are also often called the uterine tubes or oviducts. These fibromuscular tubes transport a mature female reproductive cell or egg cell called an ovum from the ovary to the uterus. Each fallopian tube is about 10 to 12 centimeters in length and is divided into 4 regions. Closest to the ovaries is the infundibulum, which has finger-like projections called fimbriae. Next is the ampulla, then the isthmus, and finally the intramural part, which travels through the wall of the uterus in order to transport the ovum into either the upper left or right of the uterine cavity. The ampulla is the longest region, and fertilization of an ovum is most likely to occur in this region. The uterus is a hollow, pear-shaped muscular organ that nourishes and supports the growth of an embryo during pregnancy. The curved top or superior part of the uterus is called the fundus, the largest section in the middle is the body, and the bottom, more cylindrical portion is the cervix. Although the cervix is part of the uterus, it's histologically different from the rest of the uterus and will be covered in a separate video. This video will just focus on the fundus and body of the uterus, which consist of 3 major layers: the inner endometrium, myometrium, and outer perimetrium, although the perimetrium is too thin to easily see in this image. The endometrium is the inner mucosal layer that's lined with simple columnar cells. The myometrium is a thick and highly vascular wall of smooth muscle. And the perimetrium consists mostly of a serosal layer or visceral peritoneum that's continuous with the broad ligament, although there are portions of the uterus that are surrounded by an adventitial layer of connective tissue instead. Alright, let's first take a closer look at the fallopian tubes. The wall of each fallopian tube also consists of 3 main layers: an inner mucosa, a thick layer of smooth muscle called the muscularis, and a thin outer serosa. At low magnification, the outer serosa is difficult to see, but if we zoom in closer, we can see that this layer is composed of only a single layer of basophilic or purple simple cuboidal cells and a very thin layer of supporting connective tissue. The mucosa of the fallopian tubes have many long, thin, and branching folds, which mostly run longitudinally in the same direction as the tube itself. The mucosal folds are more prominent in the ampulla and gradually become smaller in the regions closer to the uterus, with the intramural part of the tube no longer having any mucosal folds at all. At high magnification, we can see that the mucosa is lined with a simple columnar epithelium. This epithelium actually consists of 2 distinct types of cells: ciliated cells and secretory PEG cells. The ciliated cells can be identified by their visible cilia that wave or sweep fluid toward the uterus in order to help an ovum or fertilized zygote to continue moving in the correct direction within the fallopian tube. Also, the cytoplasm of the ciliated cells often don't stain as dark when compared to PEG cells, making it slightly easier to distinguish the 2 types of cells. Each PEG cell has an apical bulge that literally looks like a peg that's protruding into the lumen. These cells secrete a mucus that forms a film that covers the epithelium and provides nutrients for the ovum or fertilized zygote. Unlike many other tubular tissues, there are no goblet cells or glands in the mucosa of fallopian tubes. In this image of the muscularis, it's easier to identify the 2 layers of smooth muscle that make up this layer. Since this image is a cross-section of the fallopian tube, muscle fibers that are parallel to the plane of the cross-section will have a longer appearance. As a result, the inner interwoven circular or spiral layer of smooth muscle will have muscle fibers that look longer, and the outer longitudinal layer will have muscle fibers that look more round. The inner circular muscles have peristaltic or wave-like contractions that help physically move an ovum or fertilized zygote toward the uterus. Now, let's move to the uterus. In this cross-section of the uterus, we can see the clearly defined and basophilic endometrium and the surrounding myometrium. The endometrium is further divided into 2 zones. The functional layer is the upper or surface portion, and the basal layer is the underlying portion of the mucosa. The functional layer is the portion of the endometrium that's shed during menstruation and can be as much as 4 times thicker than the basal layer. The basal layer remains attached during menstruation and regenerates the functional layer. The functional layer's simple columnar epithelium consists of both ciliated cells and non-ciliated secretory cells. During the menstrual cycle, the epithelium invaginates to form simple tubular glands called uterine glands, although the glands contain fewer ciliated cells compared to the surface epithelium. These glands extend through the functional layer and form their base within the basal layer of the mucosa. The uterine glands produce a fluid rich in glycogen, which helps support the development of an embryo. The surrounding supportive tissue is the endometrial stroma, which contains an extensive microvasculature as well as a large number of cells, including stellate cells, macrophages, and lymphocytes. The myometrium is made up of 3 layers of smooth muscle. Although the individual layers are typically difficult to distinguish from one another in the uterus, the inner layer and outer layer consist mostly of longitudinal bundles of smooth muscle. The middle layer is the thickest and contains interwoven circular or spiral bundles of smooth muscle. This layer is also called stratum vasculare, since it's a very vascular layer with many large blood vessels that supply the endometrium. The blood supply of the endometrium is unique and also undergoes many changes throughout the menstrual cycle in order to accommodate the shedding or sloughing off of the functional layer of the endometrium. Arcuate arteries are the large arteries found in the middle layer of the myometrium. These arteries are branches of the uterine arteries and continue to branch further to become the radial arteries that extend into the endometrium. From here, the basal layer and functional layer actually have separate blood supplies, which is why the basal layer's blood supply is not dramatically affected when the functional layer loses blood during menstruation. The straight arteries supply the basal layer, and the spiral or coiled arteries pass through the basal layer but only supply the functional layer. The spiral arteries will branch further to become the arterioles and dilated terminal capillaries that form a rich superficial capillary bed. The distal portions of spiral arteries are sensitive to progesterone, so they'll rapidly grow as the functional layer thickens during the proliferative phase of the menstrual cycle. The functional layer of the endometrium undergoes some of the most significant changes throughout the 3 phases of the menstrual cycle. The change between each phase is gradual, but each phase will tend to have distinct characteristics that help differentiate it from the other phases. During the proliferative phase, the functional layer of the endometrium is regenerating after menstruation and is still relatively thin. The endometrial stroma is more cellular during the phase, and the uterine glands are relatively narrow and straight. During the secretory phase, the functional layer continues to regenerate, but also the uterine glands begin to accumulate and secrete glycogen, which causes dilation and eventually coiling of the glands. During the menstrual phase, if no embryo is attached to the endometrium, the functional layer sheds and passes out of the body as menstrual bleeding. By the end of the menstrual phase, the remaining endometrium is usually very thin before transitioning or cycling back to the proliferative phase.